I'm Mark Halperin.
And I'm John Heilemann. And with all due respect to Hillary Clinton, this is how you turn the page. Oh, it wasn't bad.
Let's see another replay.
It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. Hey, Mark's back. It's awesome. Happy National Ants on a Log Day, sports fans. In our lineup tonight, dealing with the Donald, sitting with Stephen, and having a ball with Haley Barbour. But first, page turn alert. The Hillary Clinton campaign has identified a weak period and is seeking to transform its candidate into a more human-like figure. Exhibit A World News Tonight interview with ABC's David Muir, in which Clinton finally apologized for her private email server.
That was a mistake. I'm sorry about that. I take responsibility. And I'm trying to be as transparent as I possibly can.
That is part of Hillary 2.0 or 3.0 or even 4.0, depending on your point of view. Here's how the updated Clinton candidate will perform according to the mainstream media outlets that were spoon-fed the details. She will A, enact humorous responses, B, initiate spontaneous reactions, and C, activate the joy capacitor. But seriously, this approach is so ham-handed that even David Axelrod tweeted that it reads like something out of The Onion and threw in a hashtag that would make my boy Shia LaBeouf jealous. Just do it! Mark? How could the Clinton campaign possibly be going about this page-turning activity in this fashion?
It's inexplicable because she's got a big problem with voters, but her problem with elites in the press and the Democratic Party is a lot worse. Yeah. And you do not tell people what your strategy is. You simply do your strategy. And they're now promising all these things about joy and spontaneity. She should just go out and be a better candidate. This talking about if she's not the nominee, this day will go down in history as one of the stupidest things they've done.
Well, I will say a day that went down in history, in my history, and somewhat in your history, in a book we wrote, as one of the stupidest days in her last campaign was back in 2007 in December, a little later in the cycle, when the Clinton campaign, flailing in Iowa, announced basically to the New York Times that she was about to undertake a likability tour. And she flew around the state in the helicopter, and everyone mocked her ceaselessly for talking about how she was going to go around and tell people, hey, look at me, I'm likable. Again, you're likable, you're not likable. If you announce you're trying to be likable, you come across like a phony, and that's what she seems like to a lot of people anyway.
David Axelrod's tweet speaks for multitudes, because that is the view of elites. And as I said, the elites overstate her problems with the voters. She's doing okay with the voters in a lot of ways, but her elite problem is immense. Apologizing will help. I don't really care about the apology. I know a lot of people do.
What's the difference?
But it is the accountability problem, the likability problem. She should be herself and not talk about being herself.
And part of the narrative with her always is calculating, overly poll tested, over market tested, over scripted, all those things. This just screams that all those parts of the narrative are true.
I can only imagine how many conversations they had between yesterday when she wouldn't apologize over this to today when she did.
Freaking ridiculous.
In the substance sector of Brooklyn today, Hillary Clinton fleshed out her campaign finance reform plan. She released an online video about the Citizens United ruling. All this part of a push, she says, where she wants to make changes like having more big donors be disclosed, loopholes in the system be closed, a constitutional amendment that would overturn Citizens United and make changes to how public financing of campaigns, presidential and other congressional campaigns work, among other provisions. John, is this bundle of proposals on campaign finance reform a good policy, and is it good politics?
I'll answer the policy part first and then the politics part second. The policy part, if the biggest thing, if it actually happened, that you ended secret money in American politics, had full disclosure, instant disclosure, it would be the most important thing that could happen to campaign finance reform of all. She's for that. I'm with her on that. As politics, this is obviously just an attempt to kind of get close to some of the Bernie Sanders voters. And I just don't imagine there's any Bernie Sanders voter who's going to look at those two campaigns and say, Hillary Clinton is not the candidate of big money. I'm going to go to her instead of my friend Bernie, who doesn't even have a super PAC.
I applaud the disclosure provisions. I think some of the others are silly, particularly with Republicans almost certainly in control of the House. On the politics of it, this is running into her weakness. I hear this over and over. You see it in the polling. People think she's too close to Wall Street. She's a big money candidate.
She is.
And to say the whole unilateral disarm thing, whatever, this is a proposal trying to ameliorate a weakness, not really playing to a strength, although she does believe in all this.
But I'm sure she does. But I mean, look, the bottom line, as I said a second ago, is I do think that Sanders voters, you look at Bernie Sanders pledging to run no negative ads, taking no undisclosed money, having
PAC.
no super PAC. If you care about this issue more than anything else, you're with Bernie Sanders, and in a few days you'll be with Larry Lessig. You're not going to be with her. She's not going to steal a single heart with this politically, although, again, as I say, some of the substance I like a lot.
It can take the edge off of some of her supporters who are just a little bit. Okay.
A little bit. All right. Today on Bloomberg TV, our new colleague David Weston interviewed Warren Buffett, who had some nice things to say about what he's been hearing from Donald Trump on tax policy.
He thinks the rich should pay more. He thinks that carried interest should be treated instead as regular income, just like would be if they were investment advisors or anything of the sort. I haven't, in terms of tax policy, I haven't heard him say anything yet that I disagree with.
Meanwhile, another big poll shows that the Donald Trump is still a giant living in the clouds, while the other candidates are trying to find magic beans that could grow a beanstalk to catch up with him. One of those candidates, Jeb Bush, has just released his first TV ad, filled with not-so-subtle contrasts with you-know-who.
We have an important choice to make about the direction of our country. If you want more D.C. politicians or more self-promoters, you've got options. Anybody can talk. I've delivered, and I hope to earn your support. I'm Jeb Bush, and I approve this message.
So, Mark, that is one example of a candidate trying to deal with the Donald. Is that the right way to do it?
You know, most of that ad is about his Florida record, which is what we've long expected Bush to try to start selling to the American people along with this super PAC. The fact that Jeb Bush needs to take two little indirect shots at Donald Trump in his first television ad tells you a lot about what he needs to do. I think more direct will probably be necessary and more effective later, but he doesn't want to be more direct right now. That is, I think, an attempt to try to diminish Donald Trump, which is one way to deal with him. And a lot of smart Republicans I talk to say that is, for now, the right way. Diminish him.
I think, you're going to want to talk about Scott Walker in a second, and I'll let you do that, and what he's doing out there. But I got to say that, to me, this is all kind of preamble to the debate next week, where I think that, every once in a while you get a feeling about these debates where you think this one's going to be a snooze, and then there's others where you think this one could be a fireworks display. All that pent-up anti-Trump energy from what happened last time where no one took him on, I think we're going to see explosions in Simi Valley. I think a lot of candidates are going to go at him very directly. Jeb, I'm sure, will be one of them. Others will be. I don't know which one will work, but I think we're going to see a lot of people trying to take on Donald head-on that debate stage.
I'm not so sure you're right, although there are three elements of Trump that I think are elevating him more than are commonly thought about. One is the fact that he's an alpha male. If you look at the history of the Republican Party nomination of the last many cycles, the biggest alpha male tends to win the nomination. Two, he's fun. He's fun to watch. People like to watch him. And three, he is entertaining in a way that not everybody in this race is. Confident and entertaining.
Was Mitt Romney an alpha male?
He's big,
yeah.
He's a big guy. And think about who he ran against. More of an alpha male than Rick Santorum,
John Huntsman,
and Gingrich and Huntsman. I think he was.
That's fair enough.
And he made a lot of money. Rich alpha male, right?
Yeah.
So
nice head of hair.
Scott Walker this weekend, I think, went for interesting, fun, and alpha by riding his Harley around New Hampshire, rode all around the state. That is, I think, Scott Walker at his most alpha. But if you think about Bush, Rubio, Walker, Kasich, are they as alpha as Trump? Are they as interesting as Trump, fun as Trump?
Man, I got to say, no number of miles on a Harley is going to make up for Scott Walker talking about maybe building a fence on the Canadian border. I'm sorry.
That back.
All right. Not an alpha thing.
Tonight, everyone we know is going to be staying up late to watch Stephen Colbert's inaugural episode on CBS of The Late Show. One of his first guests on the inaugural episode is a man who needs the Colbert bump. Jeb Bush has got a chance to show that, in fact, he is fun and interesting. Joe Biden's going to be on the show later in the week. Bernie Sanders is on next week. John, how important will this new television platform of Stephen Colbert's be for 2016?
Well, if you look at this early lineup of guests, it seems like Colbert is basically saying, I'm going to be the political guy among these main three late-night hosts, more than Kimmel, more than Fallon. I'm going to try to move this franchise over. And look, if you think about the gap that now exists, no Jon Stewart and no old Stephen Colbert, there's a huge gap out there. But there's also going to be this pull, I think, for Colbert not to be the old Colbert. So he's going to have to manage that tension and figure out exactly where he lands.
We don't know what he's going to be like, but my strong suspicion is this will be the toughest late-night show on broadcast television we've ever seen for a politician. High risk, high reward. If Jeb Bush is good tonight, he stands up to Stephen Colbert, I think it will help him a lot, because I don't think Colbert's going to go easy on people.
No, and the other thing about Colbert is, and he is he's an incredibly talented comic. He's a great improv comic, but he's also really smart.
Yeah.
And if, again, he can't become a Ted Koppel in the days of old. He can't become an adversarial.
He's not going to be Jay Leno.
No, but he's not going to be Jay Leno, and he's not even going to be Letterman. I think he can be in a place where he can be both really funny and also really on point. I think the question is whether candidates are going to feel the need to subject themselves to that if he turns out to be very wounding.
You reach your people, you reach new people who aren't typical political people with his live audience, the people watching the show in a linear fashion. But if you do well, the clip goes viral, and you can have the best news cycle of the entire election for you. If it goes poorly, though, I pity the campaign advisor who said, yeah, go on with Stephen Colbert. It'll be fantastic. You'll reach millennials.
I got to say, there's a lot of, I give Jeb Bush credit, He got a lot of guts. I mean, it's a big moment. Obviously, he's getting a higher ratings.
I'll be interested.
He's going to get out there with Colbert and not knowing anything like what Colbert's going to be like. Yep. He's putting himself out there.
Leno always had a pre-interview. They often had a taped bit of business that let the person kind of ease into it and have a good moment built into the mix. We'll see if Colbert does that. But I do believe, again, that he's going to have Republicans on, Democrats on, be tough on all of them, and it's going to be a forum unlike any other.
And everyone's going to watch. All right, coming up, a conversation, actually a two-part conversation with Haley Barbour, his book on the storm called Katrina, and his thoughts on the storm called Trump. After this.
Our guest tonight likes to say that you don't learn much from the second kick of a mule, but that's not the way he pronounces the word mule. We'll get to that in a minute. Former Republican National Committee Chairman, the former governor of Mississippi, Haley Barbour, also has a new book out. It's called America's Great Storm, Leading Through Hurricane Katrina. We're going to talk with the governor about that book in our next block. But first, we want to take advantage of the fact that he knows a bit about American politics. And, Governor, welcome you here and ask you some questions about the race, particularly the race for your party's nomination. Pretty exciting race, right?
Well, it's very interesting. In my 47 years of politics, I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah. I want to ask you about three of the establishment candidates, or so-called establishment candidates, who none of whom are doing as well in the polls as they'd like, and a lot of people thought. And I want you to just tell me for each of them what you think the single thing they need to do, or they've done so far, that's holding them back, that's keeping them from doing better than they're doing so far. And the first is a guy you know well, Governor Jeb Bush of Florida.
Well, I think Jeb Bush has to make this election more about the great conservative record he had in Florida as governor. He was one of the most successful governors in the United States of a very large and diverse state, and he is viewed by most Americans as just somebody named Bush, and there's still a lot of Bush fatigue out there. So I think for him, people need to see the outstanding record he had in Florida.
Yeah, less about Bush, more about his record. What about his fellow Floridian, Marco Rubio? What does he need to do better or different than he's done so far?
Of course, he is a tremendous performer. He's a wonderful speaker. He's really, really good. He's attractive. He's young. Being Hispanic, I think, is an advantage for him. I do think that Barack Obama has not set a very good atmosphere for somebody who's a freshman senator to try to run for president.
So can he overcome that?
President Obama couldn't run a two-car funeral.
But that's not going to change, Governor. So can he overcome that precedent?
Well, I think he can. I think what he's doing is the right thing. He is running on issues. He's talked in depth about issues, and I think that plays to his strength.
Yeah. Okay, and the last one would be Scott Walker, who was leading in Iowa, doing pretty decent in national polls, and now neither is the case. What does he need to do better or different?
Well, again, he's got some advantages. He's better known than almost any other governor because, he was governor and then he had to run 2 years later because they recalled him, and then he ran again. So here's a guy who got elected governor 3 times in 4 years, and I think that's been greatly to his advantage. I can't explain exactly why his numbers have subsided some. I think he has been trying to talk about different things, and some of them are not consistent, or not the kinds of things he talked about so much as governor of Wisconsin. I think to say that any of these three guys are out of it or in real trouble is very, very premature. And you hadn't mentioned John Kasich yet, who is a governor with a great record, too.
Well, just about to do that, Governor Barbour, going to mention John Kasich. He has positions on two issues, one of which is his support for Common Core standards in education, and the other is expanding Medicaid under Obamacare in Ohio. That are both controversial and unpopular in large parts of the Republican Party. Do you think either one of those is disqualifying for him to be the Republican nominee?
No, I don't at all. I think my state did not choose to expand Medicaid. Had I still been governor, I would not have chosen to expand Medicaid because I don't trust the federal government to keep paying this huge percentage of the cost, and we can only barely afford to pay what we're paying for now. But every state's different, and that's one of the things governors understand. That's why we'd like much more of policy to be set by the state, not by the federal government, because one size doesn't fit all. What's good for Ohio may not be what's good for Mississippi.
We've made it quite a long way in this interview without saying the word Trump, so I'm now going to say the word Trump. Is there anything that you've heard Donald Trump say so far that you regard as disqualifying for the presidency?
Well, the thing that he said that I thought was disqualifying to me, and I think to a huge percentage of Republicans, he has now changed his mind on. And that is the idea that he would run as a third party or independent candidate. Every Republican knows that if Donald Trump or any other person that has any significant support does what Ross Perot did in 1992, would have the same outcome. That if Donald Trump ran as an independent or third-party candidate, that meant we would give Barack Obama a third term, whether it was Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, John Kerry, or Elizabeth Warren. Now he has realized that that was not the right position, and he's taken what I consider the right position. I'm glad he did it.
Trump says that if he's the nominee, he'll win the Hispanic vote. Can you imagine a universe where that's true?
Well, I think it's harder for him than he makes it sound. I think Republicans have a lot of work to do better among Hispanics. When Mitt Romney said he wanted self-deportation to be the policy of the country, he ran our vote among Hispanics down to about 27%. And that is about as low as it can get, I think. But we can do better and should do better among Hispanics, whoever our nominee is.
You think Donald Trump can and could do better?
At this point, I don't think he is the strongest candidate we would have. I think Marco Rubio we talked about. I think Jeb Bush we talked about. And I think there are others who would do better. Rick Perry is somebody who has always done well among Hispanic voters in Texas, where he has been elected and reelected and reelected.
All right, Governor Barbour, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about Governor Barbour's new book about leadership and dealing with Hurricane Katrina on this anniversary time. More with Haley Barbour right after this.
We are back for a second block with Haley Barbour, even though we all know that you don't learn much from the second kick of a mule. His new book is America's Great Storm, Leading Through Hurricane Katrina. Governor, there's been obviously a lot of discussion of Katrina of late because of the anniversary. Talk about why you decided to write this particular book with this particular focus on your home state of Mississippi.
John, I thought that the story needed to be told. You know, the news coverage after Katrina 10 years ago just reminded people that the news media doesn't like to cover airplanes that land safely, that where there's a terrible story, a terrible outcome, terrible behavior, that gets all the news coverage. And in Mississippi, you didn't have that. We bore the brunt of the worst natural disaster in American history. Our people got knocked down flat. It was utter obliteration. Yet those strong, resilient, self-reliant people got right back up and hitched up their britches and went to work. Not just helping themselves, but helping their neighbors. That's a story you didn't hear told enough.
Governor, a lot of great stories in the book, lots of ideas about leadership. I want you to just briefly tell one of the stories about a young man, in order to deal with the shortage of currency in the state, who drove to the Federal Reserve in Atlanta.
Well, the largest bank on the coast, Hancock Bank, had been through hurricanes before, and they knew with the storm surge, which was 20-something feet deep at their main bank office, and all their bank's offices were destroyed, flooded, the ATMs didn't work. So they had a boy who was a trainee whose wife lived in Atlanta, and he rode out the storm there. They told him to go by the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta, put something in his trunk or the back of his SUV, and don't stop, drive straight to the bank in Gulfport. Well, when he got there, they had put in the bank $30 million in cash.
That he drove without security.
That's right. They had no idea. All they knew was a big cardboard box in the back. But the bank knew that it would be a cash economy for a while. No electricity for 12 days. You know, you couldn't get anything out of the ATM. Companies wouldn't take a credit card because they couldn't get them processed. And this same bank, by the way, loaned out $3.5 million to people on IOUs signed on a plain white piece of paper. And the comptroller of the currency, the regulators really squealed about it, yet they collected back over 90% of that money, over $3.3 million.
Governor, let me ask you real quick about one of the great perceived villains of this story, which is FEMA. You write about how FEMA got some things right, some things wrong, but you said that they, quote, did a lot more right than wrong. Do you think that FEMA deserves more credit? And for that matter, does George W. Bush deserve more credit for the handling of this crisis than they get 10 years long?
The FEMA logistical system on which all the states down there were relying, had been told to rely on by FEMA, absolutely failed. And it failed from the start. It almost created a catastrophe in our state. We had to work around it. They were criticized for that, deservedly. They did some other things that don't make sense. The federal law, by the way, in places doesn't make sense. But when you look at the totality, FEMA did a whole lot more right than wrong. A whole lot more. And they tried to be good partners. It's just the logistical system failed. As far as George Bush is concerned, he leaned forward on every decision. Whatever the federal law said was the maximum he could legally do, every time he did that. But look, people's impressions of that are all baked in. I understand that. But I do hate the fact that people don't recognize generally the federal government was a good partner and gave us in Louisiana, Alabama, and Texas unprecedented assistance, unlike any that had ever been done before for a natural disaster in the United States.
All right, Governor Haley Barbour. The book again is America's Great Storm, Leading Through Hurricane Katrina. Governor Barbour, thanks for joining us as always, and we will be right back with a very special highlights reel for the Clinton campaign.
Kim Davis, the Kentucky clerk who was imprisoned because she opposed gay marriage licenses, was released from prison today. Mike Huckabee was there. He emceed the whole thing.
I've already told him that if somebody needs to go to jail, I'm willing to go in her place. And I mean that because I'm tired of watching people being just harassed because they believe something of their faith.
She's out. Is the story over?
I have a feeling not. We'll hear more about this in the future.
Lots of milk.
We're live 24/7 on BloombergPolitics.com. For now, sayonara.